Good morning, Bitcoins. Today is Saturday, October 7th, 2017, and we've got a very special guest for you today. We're joined by Jim Bell from jimbellproject.org. Check that out. You can read more about his work. And Jim was just filling me in about basically what he started about 20 years ago. So Jim, how did it start for you with the Jim Bell Project?
Well, 22 years ago, I was thinking about a politician who spent too much money on his state, and it occurred to me that there should be a way in technology to get rid of such politicians. So I thought of an idea that turned into an essay. I wrote it in, and 10 parts later, it's become the second most famous internet essay ever, behind Ted Kaczynski's essay.
Certainly, the Unabomber Manifesto. I tried to read it myself when it was published in the New York Times.
I tried it a few times, and it was hard to get past the first 2 or 3 pages. It read like a lot of sociological essays in college. I wasn't interested in those.
So what was your essay about?
Well, provocatively, I named it Assassination Politics. And while provocative, it was descriptive. Instead of having 51% of the people decide who was going to be a politician, let's have a much smaller number of people decide who will never be a politician ever again. And the concept came from good encryption, such as PGP, and good digital cash. Modern versions, of course, are commonly Bitcoin. There are many others. And an internet way to anonymously route. And again, one system is called Tor, oddly enough invented by the U.S. Navy. The idea was, my idea, back before any of that was real, was that people could donate money to funds to purchase or to pay for correct predictions as to the death date of politicians, government employees, people who control nuclear bombs and everything like that. And the idea was, if you could go to your computer, you could type in money and you could say, well, I'll pay $1 to see that politician go. Well, if enough people do that, pretty soon that politician will, most likely he will leave. He will resign. If he needs a little more convincing, he'll leave another way. So I wrote this up in the form of an essay after considering the numerous issues, and it became extremely controversial, and I've been hated ever since then by the federal government of the United States and probably a few other governments around the world, although they haven't really spoken up yet. I believed back then that people would actually take the bull by the horns and address the issues involved. I mean, I've claimed many times this will eliminate nuclear weapons. Everybody hates nuclear weapons and wants to be on the side of the people asking for them to be dismantled, but nobody has a system for it. How do you eliminate nuclear weapons in one country if other countries haven't? My solution is very simple. If somebody controls nuclear weapons, donate money to see them dead. And if they don't resign and destroy their nuclear weapons, they will ultimately be dead. But not just that, militaries in general. The United States they proposed a budget of $700 billion a year. Who needs $700 billion? For $1 billion, if it costs $100,000 to predict somebody's death, $1 billion would be 10,000. If I could have a list of 10,000 names to eliminate, do you think I would need a military? All I'd have to do is Kim Jong-un would be the top one on the list, and Maduro in Venezuela, Assad in Syria, Mugabe in Zimbabwe, plus a few hundred of other unfavored politicians. And as far as I know, it's going to work. I'm not an unbiased person. I thought of the idea. But I've talked about it to many, many hundreds of people. And I've scoured the Google search to try to find somebody who comes out against the idea. But nobody wants to come out against the idea. Probably that's mostly because to come out against the AP idea, you'd have to come out implicitly in favor of the status quo. And I don't think anybody is prepared to defend the status quo. They need to come out and say it. The best analysis I've ever seen out of two is a guy named Sukumaran of the Indian, well, at one point he was an Indian jet pilot. Another, I think he was also a member of a think tank. And he addressed the issue very, very well. He did it because the federal government of the United States had proposed something that was suspiciously similar to my AP idea, and it was shouted down within a day by the news media, who called it terrorism futures. It was a bad case of PR problems right there. By PR, I mean public relations. Let's not have some.
Sure, of course. The science or pseudoscience invented by Edward Bernays, I think he's a close relation of Sigmund Freud. So I was talking about some of that earlier. So your idea is basically like a violent version of wisdom of the crowds. Instead of getting the best backpack or the best information, we might end up with the best government, or at the very least a government that would eliminate nuclear weapons. As you were saying, it's very hard for a country individually to choose to eliminate nuclear weapons. Ukraine recently, when they broke off from the Soviet Union, got rid of their nuclear weapons, and if anyone knows anything about recent history, Ukraine was essentially invaded by Russia, who took part of Ukraine back. So there are, if everyone doesn't get rid of the weapons at the same time, there's a problem. But under your strategy, presumably everyone would start de-arming right away.
Exactly. Anybody can work to de-arm any nation. There is no such thing as a border when it comes to AP. And therefore, you don't have to worry about the other guy having weapons, because if anything, their own people will probably disarm them. And if they don't, we will. And that'll eliminate the nuclear weapons very quickly. The militaries we don't need it anymore. We don't have to spend money, $700 billion a year for America alone. Unnecessary, totally unnecessary. So I think the world should responsibly deal 22 years later with my essay. If you don't like it, tough. The issue is, will it work? Should it work? Will you wait for somebody else to implement it, or will you debate it and decide for yourself? Because it doesn't take, like politics, it doesn't take 51% of the population to like it and use it. If as little as 1% of the population liked it and used it, it would happen. Possibly even less. Certainly 10% would get rid of every bad person, every bad politician.
So I am starting to feel a little echoes of the French Revolution here, where they lined up all of the kings and so forth and sent them to the guillotine, which was a brand new killing machine recently invented. They had the sliced blade to make it not bounce when it hit the neck.
Okay.
So what else about your idea? Now, I'd heard the idea of assassination politics on the internet, I think, for a long time, the basic idea of an assassination market. But now that we have cryptocurrency, I think we might have found the other piece of the puzzle. There's Bitcoin, first of all, then there's other cryptocurrencies like Monero and Dash, which feature more about privacy and hidden transactions and so forth. How would those fit into your idea?
Well, just a moment. I have to refresh mine.
Of course.
Well, I knew back in '95 a number of tools would be necessary to implement an AP system. One, of course, is good encryption, like PGP or some variant. Today, there's many variants. Another thing is some sort of digital cash, but it has to be very anonymous digital cash. Unfortunately, Bitcoin isn't entirely anonymous. I think how do you pronounce it?
Pseudo anonymous. If you buy your Bitcoin with cash from somewhere like Local Bitcoins and then you send it, we can't really tell where it came from. Although the guy who sold it to you on Local Bitcoins, he might be gettable.
Yeah.
It's very hard to go from the fiat system to the Bitcoin system without leaving a trail. And then when it comes to Bitcoin, it's all in a public ledger, the blockchain, and anyone can show where any transaction came from.
Well, obviously we see now that that's a problem. But in a sense, Bitcoin was a miracle of forward thinking. But what'll have to happen is some other variant, possibly Zero Coin. Monero is mentioned occasionally.
Zcash, Monero, Dash. There's a lot of privacy-focused cryptocurrencies which might fit the needs of your project.
So a person who is dissatisfied with the current politician or government employee could go to their computer, type in the amount of money that they were willing to give for that guy's disappearance. Most of them are going to retire, and perhaps the organization that builds the system, the AP organization, will say, I'll have an option. Do we take it off if he resigns? Do we take off the bounty or do we not? And it'll probably be variable either way. You can either do it one way or the other. So pretty soon, enough people will donate enough money to get enough people in government to resign or worse. And after that happens, we will not have problems anymore. We will not have governments. And I think it'll be a great advance over existing systems. But it takes research, and most importantly, what it needs now is publicity. I've been waiting 22 years for people to say, hey, this is important. This is something that needs to be done. At the very least, it needs to be studied. And so that's what I've proposed in the Jim Bell project. Let me show my shameless promotion here.
Sure.
The Jim Bell project.
So I know already that government has a problem. Government's a little like jury duty. No one wants to do jury duty. No one wants to be in the government. So we kind of end up with the worst possible government. I'm not sure who said it was. Maybe Voltaire talked about a philosopher king. That the person you really want to have governing you is the person who has no interest in governing you. How do you see the current system?
Terrible. But I've thought that for a long time. That's not new information. Yes, we need, if government was, say, 10 times as big as it, or a tenth as big as it currently is,
Sure.
we'd be a lot better off than we are today. The problem is, it is so large, and that largeness crowds out virtually everything else. Think of all those taxes that can be spent on privatized goods and services. That would be a huge market. And that's the change that's necessary.
Now, certainly we see lately with projects like Elon Musk, who's attempting to go to Mars and has been launching rockets with SpaceX, maybe government can do better than NASA. I'm a big NASA fan. I'm just into space in general. But what you're saying does seem to ring true with that example.
Things done by government tend to be inefficient and done badly. There's a saying, government does badly that which shouldn't be done at all. And that generally is the case. And where the government seems to do something well, it's usually because they contract out the actual jobs. I mean, does a government employee asphalt a road? Mostly they contract out. Why? Because when you contract something out, you get a low bidder.
Yeah.
And the low bidder might, well, at the very least, it does a cheap job. Hopefully it does a decent job. And so government doesn't really have a good role to play. And we see in I don't know, cities like New York and Boston, you get that capture effect where the government gets captured by the people it contracts with. Well, that's something that needs to be avoided. But I think the way of the future is to eliminate government to the extent it was possible. Before 1995, I was a minarchist libertarian because I was not able to think of a way of eliminating that last little bit of government. And I think I was intellectually honest to say that, well, if I can't figure out how to make it run, I'm not going to openly advocate it. However, in 1995, in January, I thought of my AP idea, and I realized it was in fact able to eliminate all government. And when that happened, I realized I had gone from being a minarchist libertarian to an anarchist libertarian. And this idea needs to be publicized. Objections should be clarified, presented in a way, and the people need to be told what's been said. And at that point, it isn't a majority vote. It's, is there enough people that would run the system? Is 1% of the people willing to use it? I guess, 22 years ago, I thought that probably 1% would be willing to use it. Now I think over 10% would probably be willing. They might have a little bit of qualms, but on the other hand, when they get their bill for taxes, or they see things like $700 billion per year of for military, I think they'll lose their qualms pretty quickly. Let's force these government guys to resign, and they will soon enough.
Okay, so your philosophy would be similar to someone like Grover Norquist, who said that he'd like the government to be small enough that he could drown it in a bathtub.
Yeah, that's about it.
And I do agree with you. It's very harrowing to think about being a NASA astronaut and being on a spaceship that was built literally by the lowest bidder. Like you said,
Sure,
it is a government
sure.
contract.
But jokes of that nature existed back in the 60s, and I was around in the 60s to remember them. But they did a pretty good job. It was national pride at that point. It was presented by NASA, but the reality is, of course, it was the individual companies.
Sure.
Different modules were made by different companies, but they all coordinated, and that was how it was done.
Sure. JPL, Lockheed Martin, a lot of the same companies that built airplanes, missiles, weapons of war, ended up building the very same rockets, which may or may not have led the foundations for the ICBMs that threatened the world during my childhood and still threaten them now.
Interesting personal involvement, or not really personal. My father in, I don't know, probably the 57 or 58 time frame, worked for General Electric, and that was before I was born, I guess. And he quit his job because they assigned him to work on the Minuteman missile, and the idea of building a missile to carry a nuclear bomb. He wasn't going to be part of it, so he quit that job. Now that was long before I was sentient, but I was glad to see that he had made the right decision.
That's incredibly noble of him to quit. Other men like Oppenheimer, who created the nuclear weapon, only realized it after the fact that he had become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly agree with you that democracy can be a very frustrating system when 51% choose and then the other 49 are completely lost and abandoned. We just had a very close election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and many people are not fans of Hillary Clinton, but to end up with Donald Trump was a specific nightmare that we're still waking up from every day. So.
I would like to make a comment on that as well. I paid attention long before, even Trump's winning of the nomination. The mainstream media gave Trump somewhere between $1 and $2 billion of free publicity. I think they directed the nomination to Trump. As a libertarian, and I'm a lifetime libertarian, I would have much rather seen Rand Paul or even Ted Cruz as the nominee. Not that I would have voted for him. No, I would have voted for the Libertarian candidate.
Sure.
But the news media directed it to Donald Trump. Everywhere they had enough influence, they made it. I think that was because, my theory is because they thought that Donald Trump would be the easiest to beat. However, even if he was the easiest to beat, that doesn't mean he was still beatable, given the opponent was Hillary Clinton. So I don't think the American people really selected Donald Trump as the Republican nominee. I think the mainstream media, or I think some people call it the lamestream media,
Sure.
directed it to him, thinking that that would help Hillary Clinton win. Well, it didn't help enough, and we are where we are right now because of that.
It also seemed at first they thought it was kind of a joke, and certainly Trump was fantastic for ratings. He would say crazy things. They'd put it in the little ticker down below. The talking heads would debate it, and so forth. So it was a joke, but then it turned out badly. I've heard several analysis from some presidential historians who basically said that because of the conditions of Obama's second term, the lack of a foreign policy success, the economic situation, that a Republican would be elected regardless of who it was. And as you said, the media kind of went for him in the nomination process. He was, I don't want to say he was fantastic in the debate, but he was much more telegenic, much more good at snappy comebacks than his opponents. He used childhood labels to label them lying Ted and crooked Hillary. These terms that we thought were just childish and unbelievable, they really stuck. People still call him that. They wouldn't listen to anything that Ted Cruz had to say. I don't agree with him personally, but they would call him lying Ted, lying, and he never got a word in otherwise, and he was destroyed by this essentially a childhood bully.
Yep, that's right. I guess so. And but I voted for the Libertarian candidate, even though he didn't know where Aleppo was, because
He could learn.
You know, I vote Libertarian.
Sure.
Now I've since been chided by somebody who said that as an anarchist I shouldn't be voting at all. My response to that is, okay, I won't vote anymore. But the only reason I was voting is to show my support for the Libertarian Party. Somebody has to show the support. Now, I would probably have stopped voting for the Libertarian if there was ever a prospect of the Libertarian actually winning. Not because I didn't want the Libertarian to win. I don't want the voting system to exist as a way of manipulating reality, because I think it's a very poor way to manipulate reality, as we have discovered in America in the last year and a half.
And it's also used as a stamp where you say, oh, well, you voted and you lost, so now you have to accept the results of the election for the next 4 years, regardless of the things he may do or say.
Yep, that's basically it. That describes it quite well.
So now, when I was a child, Ronald Reagan was president, and he was, of course, an actor. And to me, he seemed very much like a TV president. We had the conflict with the Soviet Union, and in my mind, the world could be destroyed at any time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very much against nuclear weapons. One of the things I got into Bitcoin for was to stop people from printing money. My simple historical idea to be that they kind of fund both sides of the war, and they do it with fiat money printing. And if we could stop that with something with a fixed number of units that's actually deflationary like Bitcoin, we would have maybe humanity's first hope of stopping this endless cycle of war. What do you think about that?
Well, I always thought that fiat money was a way to go buy Italian cars, but I've since been corrected on that idea. Now, as for example, Ronald Reagan, keep in mind, Reagan was governor of California in the mid-'60s, so he was a very seasoned campaigner. Donald Trump never had to be in a position of trying to satisfy all sections of society. What can I say? I believe I've figured out a way to get rid of all nuclear weapons. Within the last 3 days, I think I heard that the Nobel Prize Committee has awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to yet another organization that believes we should ban nuclear weapons. But I've never seen an organization claiming to want to ban nuclear weapons actually explain how it will be done. I mean, how do you get one country to dismantle them when there's 3 or 4 or 5 others that are going to have nuclear weapons? They would say it's not a possible solution. Well, the answer is 22 years ago, I invented a system that not only could work, but can't avoid not working if people would simply implement it the way I say. And I'm back. I ran out of patience. If you guys are not going to discuss the issue, I'm going to have a bunch of people around me, and we're going to address the matter, publicize it, get people's ideas, and if I'm forced into it, we will implement the system. I hope it will be implemented by 3 or 4 or 5 other different organizations. That's why all our research will be publicized, not secret, and if somebody else wants to implement it, hey, I'm not going to object. I'm happy. And I didn't do this. I didn't write the essay thinking I was going to be the one to run the system, to build it, whatever. No, that wasn't my idea. I figured I'd put it out. People would debate it, discuss it, and eventually they would decide it's a good idea, and somebody would implement it. But guys, you needed to deal with it.
Now, I certainly think we had some hope in the early 90s with Gorbachev and Glasnost, some of the START missile treaties where they're going to reduce the number of missiles in the U.S. and in the USSR and the former Soviet Union or Russia or whatever it's called now. But as we've seen lately, those treaties have languished. The numbers are actually starting to go up again. The United States still has missile systems driven with floppy disks and cassette tapes. They're starting to get old, and unfortunately, instead of shutting them all down, they're putting through appropriation bills to build new ones. We're starting to hear about bunker buster weapons and even tactical nuclear weapons, which would be small range, presumably acceptable to use nuclear weapons. And of course, the situation with North Korea, which is still very hot today. I saw another article today that he's working on building a long-range nuclear weapon, which is of course a threat to me because usually I'm in California, a state that I think wants no war with anyone, but unfortunately he seems to be in the crosshairs of Kim Jong-il, or Kim Jong-un, apologies.
Well, I happen to be in Vancouver, Washington, which is a small community across the Columbia River from Portland. If we get bombed, it'll probably be because they had an inaccurate missile and they were aiming for Portland. And but other than that, I think I'm fairly safe physically. The problem, of course, is that what is bad about their technology today could become very good a year from now. So we cannot rely on the temporary idea that his missiles are third rate, because they're going to get second rate pretty quick, and they may get first rate, and we can't accept that reality.
Certainly, and it's a very unfortunate situation. Even as Trump, with all of his bluster and his saber rattling, he threatens the situation, but there are 6.5 million people living in South Korea, right on the border from North Korea, and there's no way to hit North Korea without hitting the people of South Korea, as well as the people of North Korea aren't really at fault here. They have a very strong ruling class that's been able to pass power from father to son, from a very questionable person to a very questionable person, and the situation continues to get worse.
Yeah. What's really odd about it is that communism was not supposed to be a hereditary governmental system. How they managed to, add heredity to communism is beyond me. I guess the answer is it's not communism, it's just totalitarianism. And they use communism as a hook to get people interested in, 60 years ago, that kind of thing.
And just as the Soviet Union was mainly run by the Politburo, I'm not sure if true communism or true socialism has ever been tried. It seems like a small group of people always seem to rise to power and then twist it to their own aims and ends.
Which is why my AP system will work, because if there's a small group of people and if they have names and if we know where they live, then we can get rid of them as needed so that no such, I don't know what kind of ocracy you want to use, oligocracy or,
Corporatocracy.
well, that too. Now, my own personal opinion is that government has two both improper functions: transferring money from below to above and from above to below. The below to above tends to be secretive methods or methods you don't normally hear about, and the above to below tends to be the tax system. Well, as a libertarian, and in fact in the last 22 years an anarchist libertarian, I don't think it's proper for government to engage in any sort of redistribution of wealth, but you also want to make sure that you don't set up a system that allows large corporations to get wealthy on things like government contracts. That's what happens. Or, for example, in the recent case with the epinephrine pill, EpiPen, I think it was, or EpiPen.
Sure.
Supposedly, epinephrine was off patent years and years ago. Yet, why is it they were able to raise the price to $600 for two of these injectors? Well, the answer was the Food and Drug Administration put more restrictions and requirements that are analogous to the patent system, and because of those requirements, they were able to monopolize the EpiPen effectively. Government causes problems. Government doesn't solve problems. And if you want to buy an EpiPen for $50 a pen, you don't want to depend on government, because there are probably dozens of companies around the world that can make EpiPens and sell them for $50 each. They're not going to be able to do it if organizations like the FDA try to restrict things like that. There are simple drugs that could be sold at much cheaper prices and are outside of the country, and part of the problem has to do with our patent system. What can I say? There's a drug for multiple sclerosis, and I can't remember the name, but the chemical is dimethylfumarate, which is an exceedingly simple molecule, and I could buy about a pound of it for $120. If I were to buy the same pound through the drug company for the drug, it would cost probably $250,000 or $300,000. Oh yeah.
It's a good example with the EpiPen. It's very much an example of government capture, like you were mentioning earlier, where even when the government does intend to do good with having certain drugs fall into the public domain, or cartoon characters like Mickey Mouse fall out of copyright, these corporations grow so large and so powerful that they were able to charge $50 for the EpiPen, and Mickey Mouse now has an infinite copyright, which is fine for Mickey Mouse and they want to keep him, but absolutely destructive to the films of the 20s and 30s, many of which have no authors and no owners and now are rotting in their cans instead of being restored and preserved. And this is, again, just a downside of the government system, where the creators of the laws aren't always around to make sure they're upheld.
Yeah, on the example of extending copyrights, they do it claiming it would encourage output, new output.
Sure, yeah.
But they apply these new laws to these old products that were made 50, 70, 80 years ago, which makes no sense at all, because it doesn't encourage anybody today. It discourages people who thought those things were going to go out of copyright. So if they want to do that for future works, that's one thing, but extending it to past works makes no sense whatsoever, if that's the reasoning you're using to extend copyrights.
And of course, the initial idea for the copyright industry was player pianos. They were playing the songs and they were going to eliminate live music. Then, of course, cassettes were going to destroy all music. Videotapes were going to destroy all video. CD burning would destroy all audio. DVD burning, MP3 files, all of these things. Every new technology is met with a new wave of copyright protections designed to protect the old people, the old guard. And then even then, you have things like a friend was telling me about the Frank Zappa situation, where two of his children now have 60%, the other two have 40%, and unfortunately, Dweezil Zappa, who's actually trying to keep his father's music alive, is in the 40%, and is being sued out of existence by the 60%. So even the heirs to these musical fortunes and legends can't seem to get it right, even when the idea should be simple. Perform your father's music, replay it, play the old stuff, get it out there more. They can't seem to agree even on that.
All these problems are caused by government of one kind or the other. I don't think there's a problem that society has today that can't be linked in some way to government. And that's why I want to get rid of it.
Well, and let's get back to the nuts and bolts of the assassination market. I often mention it as a possible facet of Bitcoin, something that could happen. But just a basic starting question, how would the person claim the bounty?
I pointed out in my essay, and again, that was the early description of it, a person would make a prediction, he would seal it up in a digital envelope,
Okay.
then add a little bit of digital cash of some kind, seal it in an outer electronic envelope, and there may even be another couple of envelopes conceptually. But the idea is the thing would come in, the organization that receives it would publicize it in an encrypted version. Now, that's important. Why? Because the public wants to know that a prediction came in a particular form on a particular day, but you don't want to tell that person exactly what the prediction is. So all the computer networks would interact, somewhat like the Ethereum system that's being worked on today, so that your computer would tell you with software you could reasonably trust that yes, somebody did on October 7th, 2017, a prediction came in. We couldn't read it, but here it is. And then later on, a few days later, a week or a month later, an encryption key popped up, and you applied the encryption key to that information, and glory be, you found that it predicted the death of a particular person on a particular day. And the people who run this system will then thus be able to show to everybody that somebody made a prediction on a particular day, and later on they uploaded an decryption key, and included with that is an encryption key to encrypt the digital cash reward. So the organization will donate the money, or the organization will give the money to the predictor, encrypted using the encryption key, and it may be encrypted in a form that only the predictor was able to decrypt, but everybody will be able to verify through this complicated system that nobody knows the name of the person who made the correct prediction.
Sure.
But one thing they do know is the person who got the money is the same person as the person who made the correct prediction. And the result is everybody's confident. The system works. Everybody is confident that if he makes the prediction correctly one day, he'll make the money. And that's
okay, so I wanted that to be much harder than it is, but you actually pretty much nailed it there. My friends are working on a project called Augur. It runs on the Ethereum network, and what Augur uses is they call it a decentralized oracle. So if the Giants beat the Tigers 6-7, or they beat them 7-6, sorry. But if they beat them 7-6, and I'd predicted that and I'd sealed it, then if everyone can agree that this news article says it happens, and a whole bunch of people, not just one, because you don't want to be the only predictor, you want to have several people agree, on 11/22/1963, John F. Kennedy died in Dallas. They would all agree on that. It was gunshot wound, certainly some minor information like that could have been included in the prediction. And then they would agree, then unlocking the locked Monero, Bitcoin, whatever it is, and sending it to that person's address.
Yes, I'm very impressed by the work done with Ethereum and Augur particularly. They haven't contacted me, by the way. However, I can understand why those people wouldn't necessarily want to be publicly associated with Jim Bell. There's a guy who has been given the nickname Bitcoin Jesus. My name probably should be Bitcoin Lucifer.
It certainly is one of the strongest arguments that I've heard for stopping cryptocurrency is to stop this kind of a market from forming. And I think this leads well into my next question, which is, obviously maybe we could agree or not even agree, but there'd be a top 10. You mentioned Kim Jong-il, some other vile dictators who do threaten the world with their nuclear weapons. And once they were gone, there would be less and less people. But what if this never ends? What if there's an assassination market for everyone? I'm upset with my next door neighbor. His dog pooped on my lawn. I put up $1,000. Something happens to him. What if it never ends?
Well, I considered this as a possibility long before I wrote, and by long I mean a month or two before I wrote the beginning of part one of my AP idea. The answer is we're going to end up with a very polite society, a very boring and very polite society, okay? Because threatening people will be considered, well, frankly, wrong. And if you now, that's not to say we're not going to have, well, when I say boring, I use the term boring in the context. There's supposed to be an old Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And interesting to a Chinese or lots of people is wars, death, militaries, that kind of thing, disruptions. So to say that somebody ought to live in interesting times is like condemning them to hell. Okay, well, we're not going to have interesting times after AP. It's going to be boring, non-threatening, peaceful, and to the extent we can be, it'll be happy. Why? Because people who make the society not happy will not be around much longer. And I don't think people are going to take that to the ultimate degree of donating to death the person who flipped them off because they took the wrong lane change in the morning. You can be pretty.
People can be petty. They can be pretty petty.
They can.
Somebody steals your girlfriend. You're a little upset. You're not in the right headspace.
Well, that's true. What can I say? I built a device about 25 years ago. A traffic light thing that changes traffic lights from red to green.
Sure.
Now, I did it long before anybody else did. And after using it for about 6 or 7 weeks, I found that I just didn't need to use it anymore. I could peacefully wait for that light to turn green from being red, which sounds odd until within a year or 2 or 3 later, I saw a news report, a study that said that people are more tolerant of irritants like loud music if they have a switch to turn them off, even if they don't use the switch. Follow me?
Yeah.
The very
Once you had the power to control the system, you didn't mind it so much.
You didn't mind it so much. So I think people are going to tolerate some irritation, some residual irritation level because they have the possibility of turning it off if necessary. And so again, before I publicized the first essay 22 years ago, I thought, well, it's going to be a peaceful society. It's not going to have today's irritations and a polite society. And other people, even years later, even decades later, made these observations. I had already known about them. One guy within the last year or two made an observation that I considered, again, before I publicized the essay. Suppose people are making movies. Would you want to be an actor playing a villain in an AP world? I mean, assuming you think everybody knows you're an actor, right? But suppose you're playing a villain. Could you get people pissed off at you enough that They might donate it to you again. Donate. Well, anyway, there are going to be people who are going to play villains.
Sure.
Is it going to be dangerous to play a villain? Maybe the answer is people will have to pay them more to play a villain. Why? Because
there's some obvious risk in it.
There's obvious risk in
there. You could lose your head there. But mistaken bounties.
Over the last 50 years, I've heard the idea occasionally, well, in interviews from actors, they say it's always way more interesting to play a villain than a good guy, right? There's far more stuff.
I'm afraid that current politicians might think the same thing, but acting in real life.
Exactly. But yeah, and actors enjoy being villains because it's so much more rewarding as an actor to be able to play a villain. But they'll have to be compensated probably for it, there's a certain risk there. I think it'll all work out. I realize I don't expect people to automatically agree that the guy who invented this system is going to be a trustworthy source of this. But I can assure you I've thought of it long before anybody else knew about it. And I worked out what I thought were all the kinks. And by the way, I would not have publicized the idea if by publicizing the idea would in any way allow the government to have tried to have stopped it. I eventually I decided that the thing was going to be implementable. It couldn't be stopped eventually, except maybe by inaction. So that's why I publicized it, and I wouldn't do it any differently. Well, there are things I might have done differently, but they weren't.
Could have used a pseudonym, maybe.
Well, possibly, but
perhaps.
Frankly, I expected the people to take the bull by the horns and research it. Why not? And the only reason I'm speaking up now is I'm tired of waiting. We have, North Korea, we have Venezuela, we have Syria, we have, Zimbabwe, and even if you take those out as examples, I doubt whether you could find 10 well-run nations on Earth, and even them probably have a lot of things that need to be fixed. So I run out of patience. I'm going to have an organization to research the issue, publicize it, put it before the people, the public, and let them make their own individual decisions. Would you like to use it? So it won't be implemented if merely 51% of the people say so. If 1% of the people say we want to use this system, that's all it takes, easily. If 10% of people say they were going to use it, we're ready to go. That's what we want to be. I want to implement it if it all appears to be practical. And believe me, I've been listening to people. I've described this system to hundreds of people, and they get this weird grin on their face, like, "Oh, wow, that would be a great thing to have." And very rarely do I hear somebody say, "Oh no, how awful that would be." And of course, the reason I don't get those reactions very frequently is I don't normally tell them to politicians and government employees, right? And I think they realize that their system will be shut down. Literally, they will be out of a job, or possibly much worse. But I think in 99% of the cases, they will gladly leave long before they are forced out with what's the term?
Extraordinary measures.
Extraordinary measures, yes.
Extreme prejudice.
Extreme prejudice, yes. That's a good term.
So, although it may be very hard for the people at home to believe, even though the initial phases of the market may lead to a small or relatively medium-sized bloodbath, at the end, your goals are a more peaceful society for everyone.
I hesitate to use the term boring, because boring is usually a negative context. But in a society that cannot possibly have nuclear weapons and wars and militaries and taxes, boring is good, very good. And that's, I believe, the society will create. Now, there's going to be a lot of scores settled. A lot of people have done a lot of things, and I'm mostly talking about government employees. So for the first year, 2, 3, it's going to have to be settled somehow. Maybe these people are going to have to quit, give back all or almost all of the money they made in their jobs, compensate people for the damage, and then let them go. Uh, what's the term? Truth and Reconciliation Organization. But that's the way to do it.
You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Well, that's unfortunately that's probably the case, and I don't know what time frame. I think the research will last at least a year, and by research, in a lot of cases, it might be first educate the people as to what the plan is or the idea is, then ask them, is it a good idea, bad idea? Do you have a better idea? Do you like the current situation? Do you like the possibility that you're going to be hit by a nuclear bomb someday? Probably they'll all say no. Well, then if I ask them, I'll say, do you have a better solution? Can you think of something else that could be done? They'll probably say, no, I can't. Not even the best people, the smartest people can think of a solution. Well, then what's so bad about a solution? I use the statistic that in the 20th century, it's been estimated that about 260 million people were killed by government action. A lot were killed by wars and military or
sparrows.
Holocaust. Sparrows?
Mao Zedong famously had his people stop farming, bang pots together to scare the sparrows into the sky so they would die because the sparrows were killing the crops. The resulting famine killed more people than almost any war in history.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's an example of centrally planned idiocy that has to eliminate. Well, 260 million people is a lot. Assuming you believe that it's not a good idea to have anybody killed in that way, would it be better to have 260 million people killed or maybe, 2 million corrupt politicians over the same period? Well, I think most people, if you believe that all life is equally valuable, then you would have to say that it's better to kill 2 million politicians than 260 million ordinary citizens. As a practical matter, I think it'll end up a lot less than 2 million because, as an analogy, if you go over a hill with a huge army and you're faced with a much, much smaller army, most of them are going to put their hands up and say, we give up. And here's our weapons, we're going home. Please don't shoot us in the back. And so once it's clear that they are going to lose and everybody else is going to win, I think we will have a new society, and there will not be a possibility of millions of people dying. But people have to make the choice, or at least the choice has to be presented to them. And if 1% of the people are willing to use it, then it'll happen. As a practical matter, I think a few percent will, and most of them will get rid of the ones that the rest of them would probably like to get rid of, but they maybe they're squeamish or something. I don't know. So when I first thought of the idea, I thought, well, for a year or two, there might be a bloodbath of people settling scores, but eventually decided that it will gradually. The opposition will simply melt away because they have no choice.
It's a very interesting idea, and as everyone knows, once an idea is out there, it never really goes away. And where can people learn more about this idea?
Well, my very, very new website, which was started about a day and a half ago, is jimbellproject.org. Now we're trying to get the bugs worked out. JIMBELLPROJECT.org. And that has a copy of the speech, the press release, a description of the project, and a copy of my Assassination Politics essay. It also has some Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum QR codes where people can make their donations. I advocate people giving me 1,000 of their Bitcoins. If they were lucky enough to have 1,000 Bitcoins, give me one. If you have 100 Bitcoins, give me a tenth of a Bitcoin, and so forth. The effect of that, you might ask yourself, why should I give this guy anything at all? What am I going to get? Well, you won't get anything directly from me. But suppose the value of your Bitcoin doubles or triples or quadruples. You started out with one Bitcoin worth, I don't know the current value, $4,400. You give away 1,000 of that. You give away $4.4. Well, that 0.999 Bitcoins you had, if it doubles in value or triples in value, you end up with, what, 3 times what you originally started out with. And there's a very good reason, there's very good precedent to believe that something like that might happen. Go back to October and November of 2013 when Sanjuro announced his assassination market. Well, within about 3 weeks, the price of Bitcoin had gone up from about $200 to $1,100. Now, some of that rise occurred before Sanjuro even contacted me, which he did with one email. Presumably, one possibility is that they were acquiring Bitcoin and want to make a lot of money on it. I didn't know this at the time, but I directed Sanjuro to a journalist named Andy Greenberg. And much to my surprise, a week later, Andy Greenberg had written an article for Forbes about this idea. And I was even more surprised when about a day later, by that time, 100 at least other journalists had either duplicated the article or had written a version of their own around the world. And it was like an explosion of publicity. I would never have dreamed that much publicity could be implemented. Well, imagine a person watches me right now and he hears that Jim Bell is collecting money to work on a project to research the issue, publicize it, and if necessary, eventually implement it. Well, what are people going to do? They're going to buy Bitcoin because they think, the price might go way up. What is going to happen? The price will go way up. So all the people who are already bought in Bitcoin are going to make a killing. And the people who get in fast enough, they're going to make a killing too. Well, so now what do I get into this? 1,000 through your Bitcoin, 1,000 through your Litecoin, 1,000 through your Ethereum. A fair thing. And remember, you're sending a message. You're sending a message to a person, effectively in government or government in general. You're telling the world, we like what Jim Bell has proposed, or at least we don't like the lack of an alternative, and we're going to send a message that says we want this to go forward to a solution. And that's the project. Most of it is research and publicity, reviewing any arguable faults, flaws, telling people about it, taking polls, and then proceeding. If it turns out to be a valid thing, I challenge any government employee, anybody who works for government, even if you want to send in an objection anonymized, okay, fine, send your objections. And if you can show a better system, one that is reasonably likely to work, then fine, we'll publicize that too. And people will be able to choose between my proposed system and others. But keep in mind, my proposed system has been out there as an idea for 22 years. I've been paying very close attention whenever I've had access to the internet, and I have not seen alternative systems that would potentially do what it would do. And so I think we ought to do the research, take the polls, publicize the results. And I'm talking about rather extensive press releases, press conferences, advertising, and get people used to the idea that government is a problem that can be solved rather than an unavoidable thing like bad weather. So,
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jim, for being on the show.
all right, glad to be here.